Hey friends, so it's me, Sheena. Some of you know me, some of you might not. But I want to expand and develop my work into the work that I have been dreaming of for a very long time. When I studied law way back in 1990 to 1994, I did a BA in law. I did a BA majoring in legal studies and religious studies. The religious studies kind of happened by default because I was trying to major in legal studies and psychology, but unbeknown to 17-year-old me at the time, I had chosen the wrong primary degree. So when I got to second year, it was a case of either converting to a Bachelor of Social Science, which would have taken 1 year extra, or I would have to select a 2-year major. And amongst the 2-year majors that was there for me to select was religious studies, which turned out to be one of the most fascinating subjects at university. But I never quite saw the connection between legal studies and religious studies. I went on to do my LLB. I went on to practice law as an attorney and conveyancer for 10 years. Then for the last 14 years or so, I have been practicing alternatives in dispute resolution. I teach, develop and practice non-adversarial modes of dispute resolution through mechanisms like mediation. Now, I feel it's time for me to explore the connection of the sacred and justice. And I essentially have awakened more and more to the fact that the work of the pursuit of justice in our lives and in the lives of others is essentially sacred work. So, I have written a number of blogs kind of in and around this arena, and I'm going to start just to make a start by converting some of my blogs to video casts. So the first such is Sacred Justice, which I wrote on the 11th of May 2019. And I'm going to put up a link to the actual blog so you can have all the references of the quotes that I refer to and so on. They're all there in the footnotes. So let's start. Sacred Justice. Instead of seeing the many parts of the collective whole, the polities of faith and legal justice practice often tend to splinter and fragment these diverse facets. On a recent program, mediation training program, I spoke about being partial as the mediator, as the median, as the person in the middle who is trying to draw each person to common ground that can serve the whole and the parts within the whole, bearing in mind those parties are, so to speak, parts within the whole. They are parts of that whole system. So we are required to be impartial. And I recently had the opportunity to have a closer look at partiality, which is breaking things down to its parts, in a sense. And when we do that, even when we specialize or when we use an assembly line and we hone in on a specific part without having regard to the whole, we find ourselves in the antecedent of the whole system. So being partial, breaking things down to its parts, might not serve the well-being of the whole system. We see this very starkly in the way we are taught to practice law. As litigants, we are taught to attack or defend a very narrow point of view. We are consulted by a client, and we look at everything through that client's point of view, even to the extent that we emphasize the parts of the truth that serve our client's case, and we de-emphasize the parts of the truth that do not serve our client's case. Now, the problem with this is, even though that falls within the ethical rules of the profession, it doesn't serve the well-being of the system that our client is a part of, whether it's a family system, a business system, a workplace system, a community system, or the system that is our society. It's all a system, and each of us are moving parts within that system. So it is in all of our well-being if whatever we do, whatever actions we take, whatever choices we make, take account of, have regard to the whole system. So in time, I want to examine 4 propositions. The first is that genuine human justice is inherently a spiritual endeavor. That's the first one. The second one is that the service and results of justice will be enhanced by intentionally introducing certain elements and skills of spiritual formation into the process. And I want to talk about those skills of spiritual formation more deeply, and I want to talk specifically, which I think I'll do in a second talk, about how as mediators our own inner transformation, our own spiritual work, our own service and look into what's inside is important in the work that we do, and our well-being, our spiritual well-being, our sacred well-being is important in service to the whole, encompassing the parties that we serve, the parties in conflict that we serve. Third proposition is that it's in the crucible of spiritual practice of justice that the space for human transformation is opened up and religious coercion is guarded against. I believe that we're living in the most transformative moment yet in human history. What do we do with it? How deep do we go? How deep do we go? We go deep. We go deep. It's important. We're going to talk more about that. Number 4, fourth proposition, and this is where we're going to for us. This is what's important for us as mediators and ADR practitioners. The practice of alternative modes of dispute resolution like mediation with an emphasis on restorative justice thinking can be the finest of launching pads for all of the aforegoing. Now, the idea of justice is rooted in the spiritual. The secular sacred divide, the splitting into parts, the partiality of this is the sacred and that's the secular and never the twain shall meet, has its roots in Greek thought. Remember, Greek thought was the age of rational thought, the age of reason, which tended to compartmentalize the human condition into the dual worlds, the physical and the spiritual. As I talk about often in our professions, We can be healthy or unhealthy. We are our most healthy selves when we are our most integrated selves. There's a connection between the head, the heart, the physical being, the emotional being, the spiritual being. It's when those parts come apart, when there's a disintegration and we become unhealthy, that we turn to various forms of addiction, and we can often live very much inside our heads, and it's a way of coping, but that may not be our healthiest self. And if we're not our most healthy self, then we are probably not serving those we are in contact with to the best of our abilities. So the dichotomous view, there are two parts. There's a binary of reality has begun to lose its credibility, and we have started to see a rise in restorative justice, which could be regarded as part of a shift in thinking around what it means to be whole beings. The shift lies in something like what we do to one part of the system, we do to the whole system. So the win-lose type of process of litigation loses its starts to lose its credibility, because we start to see that, as I've said, what we do to one part of the system, we do to the whole system. Just like what we do to one cell of our bodies, we do to the whole body. What we do to one organ in our body, we do to the whole body. So, precipitated by restorative justice, we now see a re-emergence of ancient forms of indigenous justice practice, all of which have deep spiritual roots. This resounds with the strengthening of movements like the integrative law movement. Lawyers are discovering themselves, or rediscovering themselves as healers, change makers, peacemakers. An inspiring source of this work is Jacob Wright's writings, one of the leaders of the integrative law movement. Check her out or get in touch with me for some contacts, directions, resources. We're starting to see her work and the work of others like her, aligned to her, aligned with the integrative way of doing things, show up in law schools, legal professions, and practice in alternatives across the world. There are many courageous seekers and doers here as well. Amanda Lamond of the Integrative Law Center and Awakening Lawyers, Gabriella McKellar of For the Children, John Ford, writer of Peace at Work and former editor of Mediate.com, South African lawyer now living in California. Now, the Western adversarial and accusatorial system is not an easy place to extend the sacred secular continuum. So it's not an easy place to say, well, these things are connected. In these systems, the messiness of actual life and lived experiences that result in conflict and legal disputes, and that are oft fraught with inconsistencies and ostensible contradiction, must necessarily give way to the either or, the this, that thinking that belies the process of distilling stories, the testimony given by witnesses, into facts that the court is able to adjudicate upon. This means that much truth is sacrificed on the altar of facts. as I've often said in court, facts can be the enemy of truth, because what we're essentially doing is we're filtering each of the stories through a complex set of evidentiary rules which are artificially imposed on these stories, and then we, through these complex rules, distill these parts of the stories down to facts, what we call facts, that the court can then reliably adjudicate on. Now, if you've ever been in court, you might and have then heard the final decision and how it was arrived at, you might say, but huge parts of the truth were left out of that. Huge parts of the truth. It's like that. It's in many respects it's an artificial system, in that the court has to be able to rely on corroborated facts, which might only be parts of the whole truth, parts of the truth that are capable of independent or objective corroboration, and then of course adjudication. This means that those of us who practice and or are drawn to the practice of alternatives like mediation and philosophies in justice like restorative justice, unitive justice, and therapeutic jurisprudence are well placed, and I would venture further and say have a responsibility to work to bring about a reconnection of the secular and the sacred in the work of justice. We know that in this is big. We know that in medical and psychological terms, human beings function best where their physical, emotional, and spiritual lives are integrated. We know that we become unhealthy when the various parts of our being disintegrate. My experience has been that very difficult professions like law can push us up into our heads, and we can disengage our hearts. Sometimes that's how we survive the stress of these professions, the stress of being immersed in other people's trauma, the stress also of what is expected of us amidst that other people's trauma. So this can become a coping response. We can become stoic. Understood differently, we need a healthy head-heart connection in order to remain healthy or whole. We can go further and say we need a healthy head-heart-body connection in order to be whole and healthy. When we become stuck in the one aspect of ourselves, be it head, heart, or body, we become vulnerable to addiction. So if I'm all heart, if I live all in my heart, I become unhealthy. If I live all in my head, I become unhealthy. If I live all in my body, I become unhealthy. I need a healthy head, heart, body connection, and I would add to that spirit connection. So when we become stuck in one aspect of ourselves, as I say, we become vulnerable to addiction. So addictions and pain-numbing pursuits can come in many forms, from exercise to alcohol, medication, screens, and many other ways that we get stuck in the one part of ourselves while failing to live in the others. As ADR practitioners and mediators, we get to keep pointing parties back to the whole. We get to apply a whole system approach. We get to look at the whole person, the whole relationship, the whole family, the whole community, and we could go on. We get to. So what do we do with this? We do the work on ourselves. We do the work on ourselves, and that's the second aspect that I'm going to explore. We reflect and we seek. I've run our 5-day training groups this year. I was talking back in 2019. What wonderful discussions we have had, what learning and growth, and I speak largely for myself. I learn from every single person I meet. I learn from every training group I teach. I learn from every process I mediate or arbitrate. I learn from every person that I consult to and advise. One of our participants messaged me and said that mediation training has changed the course of my life. Her name is Lungile, and I believe that she is already on a unique path as a seeker before she spent time with us. Samora Michelle used to say that the beautiful people have not yet been born. I think they have. They're amongst us. They see things a little differently. Uncomfortable with the way we live from compartments. They're on a new search for the whole way. A new way of working for justice is being built in the shell of the old. I think it's a re-emergence of how things were always meant to be. And it's a chance for us to systematically rediscover the practice of true justice, where the practice of law has become more about the rules than about justness. Very often on our 5-day programs, people say variations of, I feel like I've come home. I feel like this is my language. I've never spoken it before, but I feel like this is my language. This is recognition. This is not cognition. Cognition is knowing something for the first time, possibly. Recognition is a re-establishment of a connection with something already known. And I believe that the practice of the whole, which we can say is where the sacred secular continuum is, it's the practice of the whole. Healing is in the whole. It's within all of us. We've known it all along. We've known it all along. And when we come back to a teaching or a training group like the 5-day training, we say, I recognize this. I know this. There's something. I've seen this before. Yes, you have, because this is how we were created. We were created to heal. We were created for the whole. We were created to be something far larger than ourselves. We are part of this whole thing. When we dive into the ocean, the whole ocean touches us. I read that somewhere recently and made an incredible impression on me. Yes, it's true. It's true. In South African law, ours is a constitution where the secular and the sacred can coexist. We have everything we need to narrate a sacred justice, one that liberates, heals, restores, and honors the whole.